This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra.
Welcome back to Beyond the Big Screen. We have another installment of Hollywood Hates History today. This is a collaboration, as usual, with Scott Rank of the History Unplugged podcast and others on the very best and, of course, very worst of history-based movies. Let's see if Hollywood hates history again today. The next few movies Scott and I will talk about have at least one common theme. They all involve John Wayne in one way or the other. John Wayne either really loved history or just truly hated it and wanted to destroy it. Whatever John Wayne felt, he had a talent for turning any era of history into a great Hollywood Western. Today, Scott and I, and of course you, have to decide whether John Wayne respected the tradition of Genghis Khan or if he shot it full of flaming fire arrows. Today, Scott is going to defend the 1956 classic you may have never heard of, The Conqueror, starring John Wayne. If you have a historical movie that you just love or hate, let me know and maybe we can make it into an episode of Hollywood Hates History. I have a few other movies in the work with Scott Rank and some other podcasters. If you'd like to participate in Hollywood Hates History or have ideas, send me an email to my email address, steve@a2zhistorypage.com. I definitely love to hear from you. Thank you again for listening, and I will see you next time beyond the big screen.
Hey everyone, welcome back to our series where Steve Ware and I are looking at times where Hollywood hates history, some of the most historically inaccurate movies, and we have a couple that are good, but so far it's been pretty awful. So, Steve, are you ready for The Conqueror?
I think I'm ready. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm going to do it my best. This is going to be a tough one to defend.
I have to really give it to John Wade. I thought he did a good job getting in character, and I think he worked with a dialect coach and a lot of other things to become a Mongolian. So I was impressed. How about you?
Oh, yeah. As being a Mongolian, he really nailed it.
Yeah.
If you catch our sarcasm here.
Yeah, everyone, just to get a sense of what we're talking about, I'm almost positive you haven't seen the 1956 movie, The Conqueror. It's old. It's also terrible. Just go to YouTube, look for the original trailer. You can find 5-minute clips. You really only have to watch 5 minutes to get what we're talking about. Please don't watch the whole thing. I'm begging you. But if you don't know, it's a movie that casts John Wayne as Genghis Khan. And I think this is really getting bold, but I would say it's the worst casting I've ever seen of a movie in my entire life. Can you think of anything that's worse?
Not many. No, I think this one has to be pretty close to the worst cast movie. I know it's my job to defend the movie, but in that regard, you're absolutely right. I'll concede that point.
Yeah, this is 1950s Hollywood, so they have no problems with yellowface and giving him Fu Manchu makeup. And in addition to the rest of the cast, almost all of them, I think, are white, with the exception of the actor playing Genghis's brother. To the movie's credit, he is called Temujin and not Genghis, so that's already 1 point in its favor. But yeah, just a couple of things about the movie before I talk about it. It had a lot going for it. It starred John Wayne. He's, I would say, one of the greatest Western genre actors in history, so put him in the right movie and he is very good. It was produced by Howard Hughes, one of Hollywood's most successful producers. The love interest, Borte, called Bortai in the movie, Genghis's wife in history, was played by Susan Hayward, an Academy Award winner. It was actually one of the most successful movies in 1956. But yeah, everything about it was wrong. And I want to do a couple of line readings because the screenwriter wanted to give it an archaic sound to the movie. So it seems like it's being written. It seems like it comes straight from a chronicle or a direct translation from the secret history of the Mongols, upon which we know most about Genghis. So John Wayne will say, "I feel this Tatar woman is for me. My blood says take her." Then he also says, "I greet you, my mother." And you could just say the word pilgrim after any one of these lines and it wouldn't read any different. "I greet you, pilgrim." Every line is just hilarious. So watch 4 or 5 minutes and you'll get exactly what you need. A couple of just things about this movie before we get into it. John Wayne actually lobbied hard for the part of Temujin, Genghis Khan. Originally, they wanted Marlon Brando, and it wouldn't have been good, but I think that could have been a more inspired choice. And what he was trying to do was he imagined it being a Western, and maybe he was thinking, well, when you get right down to it, the Mongol story is a Western story where you have a stoic figure on the frontier who exists on the edges of society and manages to have victory. So theoretically it could have worked, but in execution, not at all. And Genghis Khan John Wayne even said he wanted to play Genghis because he saw him as a gunfighter. The sad thing about the movie, in addition to being terrible, it was filmed in Utah's Escalante Valley in 1954, and it really looks like Utah in the movie. But it was just downwind from a place where there were 11 nuclear weapons tests in the 1940s, and 91 of the 220 cast and crew were diagnosed with cancer in the decades afterwards. Now, some have said that, well, this isn't too different from the normal rate of people who get cancer at the end of their lives, but this movie literally killed people in addition to brain cells, so pretty bad.
I mean, this is veering close to your academic qualifications, and you speak Turkish, modern Turkish, and ancient Turkish. Does John Wayne, and Mongolian is a Turkic language, if I'm not mistaken. So with your expertise, John Wayne obviously nailed a Turkish accent, right?
Yeah, it was really good. I mean, well, it's when you watch it, he is not doing anything different in his voice from whatever you would see in any John Wayne movie. He does not do anything but be himself, and which there are a couple times in this movie where it works because his actual character is completely unlikable. He kidnaps his wife, and she develops Stockholm syndrome for him. And if you don't bank on the fact that it's John Wayne and you're watching the movie and think, okay, he's the protagonist, so I guess I'm supposed to root for him. So by not even getting to the character, it does work because his actual written character is completely unlikable and impulsive. He says stupid things. I feel this totter woman is for me. My blood says take her, pilgrim. So he's totally impulsive, completely unlikable. It doesn't work as history, and it also doesn't work as film, but I won't get too far into film criticism.
I think one of the things you can say for the movie is that it's a mashup of sword and sandal with the Western in an area of history that maybe isn't even explored very well in today's movies, let alone in 1956. You got to give it a point or two for that. For it went bold. It did fail at it. I'll admit that much. But he did try something big with this movie.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the few positive things, it's a product of his time, but that's not always bad. I mean, you have the classic Hollywood filmmaking with the really nice wide-angle shots and Technicolor with the swelling orchestral music of the boots of Utah in the background. And this is a time when a lot of Westerns are made, so you can get hundreds of extras who know how to ride horses. And sometimes they're riding down 70% grades. I don't know how you do that on a horse. You couldn't really do that as easily today because there aren't as many Westerns that are made. And, some of the themes in a Western could work for a story of Genghis Khan, of man versus nature, man versus society. And the beauty of the Western genre is that it strips all those things down to its most fundamental units. And I like Westerns as a genre. They've been sort of supplanted by action and horror and other genre films. But I guess in that sense, we can say a couple of good things. Any other positive thing you'd like to say, Steve, before I sink my teeth into the plot?
I think that really is the best you can say for the movie, is that a movie like that, there's just no conceivable way that this movie would even, the spark of this movie would be considered today. Yeah, but it tried. I think it tried. You've got to give it at least a plus for trying something.
Yeah, once we get to the end where I talk about how to make it better, there's another movie I found that takes this idea and I think makes it work fantastically. And this movie is not it. So I'll mention some of the plot, and then I'll kind of weave in the things that I hated with it too. And feel free to chime in as I go along, because The plot's a little bit dense. I'm going to streamline it as much as I can. It's a little bit convoluted. I won't get too far into it because, honestly, listeners, you're not really going to watch it. It's just watch the summary and save yourself some misery. So the movie opens with this wide-angle shot where Genghis is planning a raid on a tribe called the Merkits, which is historically accurate, so that's a point in this movie's favor. And he wants to capture the bride of Targatai, who's a Merkit chief, and this is Borte, his wife. This isn't how it works out historically. His wife Borte, it actually works out where when Genghis is 9 years old, he's sent to live with Borte's tribe, and he's betrothed to be married to her in a sense, but then his father gets assassinated by the Tatar tribe and he doesn't. But anyway, that's where this movie veers off historical course, but I'm not going to stick it to him too hard. So he's going to attack a tribe, the Merkits, because he's going to attack them because this woman is a Tatar, which Borte wasn't, but a Tatar tribe killed his father, Yeshugai. So he's doing this based on personal conflict, which a lot of Mongolian tribal warfare was based on that. Where the movie starts out, where it veers off course, one of them they consistently depict wrongly is warfare. You have a bunch of guys rushing a bunch of other guys all on horses, running at each other with swords. How can you have a movie about Mongols and not have the bow and arrow? The Mongol recurve bow is the backbone of the Mongolian Empire. And I get from a producer's standpoint, they don't want to give a bunch of extras bows who don't know how to use them. But come on, the Mongolians were famous horse archers. They could shoot from up to 500 yards away, and they'd pull at about 180 pounds of pressure and could fire when all four of their horses' hooves were off the ground so that wouldn't jostle their shot and make it miss. So one of their famous attacks is that they would feign retreat, and then enemies who weren't versed in steppe warfare would chase after them. They would turn around, they would be at a distance, fire volleys of shots, and then retreat again. And yeah, this is how they won. So no archery, big miss. Basically, Genghis, or Temujin as he's called in this movie, he encounters this woman, Borte, who's newly betrothed to the leader of this Merkit tribe. They make it out that she's the daughter of the man who murdered Temujin's father. So that's not how the story goes, but the movie's trying to make them star-crossed lovers like they like to do in 1950s. And they make it out that Genghis capturing her triggers a war with the Merkit tribe, as if, Genghis wants to do this, or you find out later he intended this, but at the time it seems like he didn't care. Well, according to a somewhat contemporary source of Genghis's life, The Secret History of the Mongols, Temujin didn't abduct Bortai. They were betrothed when he was 9 and she was 10. And Genghis was brutal, no doubt about it. The Mongols were brutal in their warfare. They sacked and they pillaged, but they weren't impulsive and stupid. And this is something else that the movie consistently gets wrong, where Temujin is portrayed as just doing what he feels he ought to do as is right. People were brutal on the steppe, but they were very careful to trigger a blood feud with another tribe and to have all their people wiped out just because they saw an attractive woman that they wanted. If you just see an attractive woman that you want, just get a concubine. How hard is this? This is steppe life. You don't have to steal someone else's wife and trigger a blood feud. So Mongols were brutal, as Dan Carlin repeatedly mentioned in his podcast series on the Mongols. And for some of the military history fanboys of them today, Dan Carlin is trying to say that we sweep their brutality under the rug. Well, we realize that they could kill tens of millions of people, but they weren't stupid. They weren't just impulsive barbarians, because you can't create an empire if that's your modus operandi. Okay, so when you were mentioning, Steve, earlier about the silly Turkish things, when he captures Bortai, however they pronounce it, and return to the Mongolian camp, they try to create some atmosphere where people are playing instruments. I don't know if most people would notice this, but almost all the instruments weren't Mongolian as far as I could tell. They were Ottoman. You'd have a big drum called a darbuka. You'd have a woodwind instrument called a ney, a long stringed instrument called a saz. So there's tons of things in this movie that have sort of like Oriental elements, but these are things that a European traveler going to Constantinople in 1700 would see, not on the threadbare Mongolian steppe of 1200. And yeah, so there's a lot of back and forth that happens in this movie. Borte goes to Temujin's brother Jamuka, who is Temujin's real-life future rival. You can tell there's tension between the two brothers, and that is a historical fact where Jamuga, however you want to pronounce it, they have a rivalry and that consumes a lot of Genghis's early rise to power. I'll just call him Genghis instead of Temujin to make things simple.
That's probably one of the weirdest things of the movie is why they chose to call him by his real name, Temujin, when most people today who are even into history might not know that his real name was Temujin and would just go by Genghis Khan. And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
Yeah, I mean, people being all fancy pants will do Chinggis, since that renders it, but whatever, I don't care. Genghis, that's the honorary title when he's on the imperial level. Temujin is his original name, so the movie is trying to be factual in its own way, and it even starts out with this opening text. It said, "This film is a fictional account, but based on true events." Some kind of loose Dan Brown language that lets it play.
Have everything.
Yeah, it's saying, don't hold us to the facts, but this is based on something. So for whatever that's worth. But yeah, they do call him Temujin. So there's this back and forth rivalry. I won't get into the whole film, but the idea is Jamuka questions Genghis's leadership, where he thinks that he's impulsive. Their real leadership came down to Genghis wanting to build his state based on meritocracy and not really minding too much which tribe someone is from, whereas Jamuka is interested in upholding Mongol aristocratic traditions and favoring people based on their tribal background. So historically, Genghis, he has a lot of resemblance to other people who built large states in semi-nomadic conditions. The two of us talked about early Islamic history in another, I think it was on your podcast, Steve. Yeah. And Muhammad has a lot of similarities to this, where he didn't favor people based on their tribal background, which was very big in Arabia. Osman, the founder of the Ottoman Empire, same thing, favored people on meritocracy. So all three of these people, it's part of their political genius to help overcome tribal rivalries and to forge people that are normally at war with each other and to harness all this energy outward instead of inward, and allows them to do this. But in this movie, Genghis is just an impulsive barbarian and kind of blunders from like one battle to another. Okay, so at one point they go to an ally in the movie. He's called Wang Khan. Tolrul, as he's known in the sources, he was an ally to the Mongolians. He was a Khan of the Karaites and blood brother of Genghis's father, Yeshugai. His whole city looks ridiculous. It looks like this built-up walled city, like something you would see like an Arabian Nights type of thing. Nothing that built up would have been on the steppe at this period. You'd have to get into northern China for something like that. At one point when they're there, there's a belly dancing show. Again, like all the ladies are dressed up in Arabian Nights style. And this type of dancing, women who danced it'd be mostly exclusive to the harem, and it would be learning the art of the dance would be part of a harem lady's training. And then Borte dances, like as if a Mongolian steppe girl would know how to dance in the harem fashion because she wouldn't be trained in the harem arts. And then one of the main belly dancers, she's dressed in a very ridiculous outfit that looks like a Dr. Seuss, like a Yink and Pink Ink type of getup. And so this, like all these kind of like motifs in the movie, they borrow heavily from like a European travel writer in 1800s depiction of Ottoman culture. Also, I should mention, too, the costumes people wear. They're fairly accurate Ottoman costumes, or I'm sorry, not Ottoman, Mongolian costumes, but they're accurate for the imperial period, where you think of the metal hats with the point on the top and the leather, and then the more ornate, like ceremonial robes. That's true for the imperial period when the Mongolians are raiding northern China and the Khwarezmian Empire, and they do have this wealth from plundering raids. Before this time, like, I cannot emphasize how rough living on the Mongolian steppe is. Like, some people are practically wearing mouse skin robes, and they are hunting whatever they can, but it can get to 40 below in winter. You're shivering in a yurt. I mean, life is rough and it is scarce. So, and I think even if a movie were made today in a modern period, they would do that as well, just because they want to associate the iconography, and you don't want to like show a bunch of people looking like they're wearing like camel hair tunics and look like penitent monks in the desert. So that's not as glamorous from a Hollywood standpoint. So I don't blame them from a producer level, but that's what it looks like. Basically, the movie goes, there's a lot of back and forth where Genghis and Jamuka are captured. They are able to escape. Then they are able to evade the Merkites. Jamuka is getting a little bit fed up with Genghis. Eventually, Genghis is captured, brought to the Tatars, and later that night he leaves. Borte is develops delayed onset Stockholm syndrome and decides that she loves him for reasons that aren't very clear. So then, while Genghis is away, he finds in his wake that Jamuka has been named chief. That's loosely true, where when Genghis and Jamuka part ways, according to the historical record, Genghis is exiled, and then he has to defeat Jamuka. And then he decides, Genghis, he's going to defeat, in the film, the Tatar tribe. And he says, "For I will have Borte if I and all go down to destruction, pilgrim." So this is just another example of him putting the lives of his tribe at risk for personal desire. And people were barbaric then, but they weren't stupid. If you're able to build up a following, you're not going to risk their lives just for lust that you could obtain by any concubine in your tribe. It completely washes away the immense diplomatic and political abilities that Genghis did have to bring together different tribes and to upend the entire Mongolian political order by meting out positions of high command to ability and not who you were in the aristocracy. He was sort of like a primitive Ataturk in that way. So, I give credit to Genghis where credit is due. Just to kind of like wrap up some of the main plot points of the film, Jamuka and Genghis are able to overcome some of their differences. They go to their ally Wang Khan. They're betrayed because they don't trust him. Eventually, Jamuka is Wang Khan's advisor kills him, and then they're able to harness all the forces of this group of people. And what happens after that? Eventually, they do go to war with the Tatars. I also noticed this movie, there's lots of day-by-night shots. That means where they change I don't know how cameras work, but it's a daytime shot, but they do something with the filtering to make it look like it's nighttime. I don't know if you put a filter over the lens or whatever, but for whatever reason, there were tons of day-by-night shots in this movie. Mongols raid the Tatar camp. Hundreds of horses go off to fight each other. The battle, it's not done very well. This movie does what almost any Hollywood movie does, where combat is imagined as just melee combat, where two sides run at each other and then there's hundreds of little sparring matches. Every movie does this. Avengers Infinity War does this in the Battle of Wakanda. Braveheart does this. The Patriot, the Mel Gibson one, where the two shots fire a few shots and they run at each other and then they fence. Combat doesn't work that way. It hasn't worked since, I don't know, the Sumerians. When was the phalanx made? Do you know, Steve?
Maybe with the Greeks. I think even that style of combat was out of style before then too.
Yeah, I mean, ancient combat, you push people together in phalanxes so that if you just run at people, you're going to get destroyed by a phalanx. They had that figured out in the ancient world, people. Come on. But the two sides just sort of run at each other. They don't have bows and arrow. They have swords that kind of slap each other. And Temujin is able to kill the Tartar leader. At the end, he sees Jamuka and offers him forgiveness, but Jamuka basically offers to poison himself. He says that he will die not by bloodshed, so his spirit can be of counsel. That's a little bit accurate, where Jamuka did die not by being killed, but he sort of voluntarily poisoned himself But that was not just due to a little tiff between the two. That's when the two of them had very powerful factions and were warring with each other, and Genghis eventually subdues him. So that is my overview. I'm going to mention some other things that were ridiculous about the movie, but let's put a little bit of positive in here. So, Steve, do you have any really positive thoughts about why this movie is incredible and wonderful?
And now, a brief word from our sponsors. I would have to say, maybe not incredible, but good in the fact that they really did introduce us to a few things that probably people in the 1950s didn't know about the Temujin Genghis Khan story, and probably even just the broad details of it. So maybe if it did strike somebody's fancy in the 1950s to become a scholar of the Mongols in the 1970s or something, I think that must have been, maybe that happened to one person somewhere along the lines. I also think that one thing that I thought was kind of, and I wonder what you thought of that, there was a scene where I think it might have been where Temujin, John Wayne, met Borte for the first time, and they're pulling a fully built yurt on a gigantic tractor trailer pulled by oxen. I thought that was the whole point of a yurt, is that you could take it apart and not have to pull it like that.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
I think they just wanted to show a yurt.
Yeah, that's a terrible... Yeah, it's a wagon that's, 20 feet wide? Just absurdly wide, and it's pulling an entire yurt on it. Why on earth would you... that's ridiculous. You fold up a yurt. I mean, they were completely mobile. Why wouldn't you be if you could do all that? You would... you have horses, you would graze them, you would have livestock, and that's what you do. So... it wouldn't be more comfortable. Wagons, if they don't have springs and things like that, which really until the early 20th century, wagons are very uncomfortable to ride. A Model T was very uncomfortable to ride. A horse would be, I would think, much more comfortable than being on a wagon. I don't even know if they had wagons. With the scarcity of timber, I doubt it. Where would you repair it if a wheel came off? And that's a lot of things with horses. Now, like you said, this is a movie in the 1950s. You'd have to be a total nerd to nitpick these things, but we are, so that's what we do, and I will nitpick this. I mean, most of the horses, they're stallions, and they have saddles, and they have reins. Mongolians rode Mongolian horses. They were smaller, but they had incredible endurance, could go 80, 100 miles in a day. No one had saddles back then. Nobody had reins back then. You rode bareback. Every Hollywood movie gets this wrong, but I always forgive this just because you can't expect hundreds of extras to ride bareback when no one will really know the difference. So who cares? The costumes were sort of okay. Like I said, they're from the Imperial period. They're not the pre-Imperial. And this is something that's commonly mistaken with the Mongols, where when we think of them, creating civilization or creating the Silk Road, there's a Jack Weatherford book called Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World, where he basically credits the Mongols with, they created the Renaissance, they created religious tolerance and gave Thomas Jefferson the idea of separation of religion and state. Any good thing that the Mongols did was purely a pragmatic means to have a smoothly run empire. And anything civilized about them comes from the Yuan Empire much later on, down into the Kublai Khan, and even after him, generations after Genghis. But that's when the great Khans are adopting Chinese civilization. That was one of the most advanced civilizations on Earth at the time. It certainly wasn't the time of Genghis. I mean, this is dirty steppe frontier politics. All the costumes of the women were completely ridiculous. They look like 1930s Hollywood starlets that maybe spent an afternoon hiking and worked up a slight sweat to give them a little bit of a gritty work, but still, done up in a starlet style. I was upset that they didn't drink kumis, which is fermented horse milk out of bowls. Fermented horse milk is what powers the step. You're just drinking it by the gallon. It's fermented, so it's alcoholic. That's how you get hammered on the step. If in any festival, they would have large bowls, and you're drinking horse milk. If you want to get fancy, you throw in some meat in there too. And have you ever tried kumis, Steve?
No, I haven't. Have you?
I'm going to be honest. It's not my thing. Maybe I didn't have a good kind, or maybe if I grew up with it, I would think differently. But it was pretty gross. But that's I'm not going to judge. I like things other people think was gross. What else? Like I said, Borte was not a Tatar, and she wasn't captured by Genghis for no reason. They were betrothed at a very young age. And Genghis, he only partially sought to kill the Tatars out of revenge. They did kill his father, so that is something, but it was mostly about state consolidation. What else is there? Can you think of anything that was bad about it? I'm kind of blanking because there's just so much to go off of.
I'd really have to say that they had to have made this movie. I didn't see too much about why this movie got made, but it really was in peak Western and right in the heart of the sword and sandals, biblical epic, Roman epics. You had movies like Quo Vadis come out at about this time, the Ten Commandments, all those big ones, and it seemed like it fits naturally into those really over-the-top, stilted, acted movies that were just really big productions, like you said, with thousands of horses running through the fields in these, really big landscapes, that it fits really well into what Hollywood was doing in the mid-1950s.
Yeah, and that's something that almost works to its advantage, had it been done well. Like at this time when you have the era of the movie star, where sometimes these people, they're not so much characters, but they're archetypes. And when you have these wide angle shots and these people who, like with John Wayne, sometimes when he's monologuing, it's like he's speaking with destiny itself. So it could have been done well in this sense. I mean, I imagine a movie on Genghis Khan be made in 2019. It'd be, I don't know, have to be done like a subversive or an ironic version where Genghis is Will Ferrell and it's a stupid, ridiculous comedy. Or like a Channing Tatum where it's like a mock of 21 Jump Street where it's making fun of it, but it's completely anachronistic. I'm just trying to imagine like how the ways we would make it terrible today, the way they made it terrible in the 1950s, just to give the 1950s its due.
Or just utterly blood-soaked with no plot whatsoever, but just one gruesome, gory scene after another, and maybe a Game of Thrones type sense.
Yeah, I think Netflix had they tried to launch a series called Marco Polo, but make it very violent with nudity, like Game of Thrones. I never watched it. I guess I should. I'd be curious. So maybe going in that type of way to really kind of get the scope of Genghis Khan and the Mongolian Empire. One little fact I want to mention before some thoughts on how to make it good. I was talking about how there's no archery, and that's a big problem for me. I just wanted to mention a little bit about Mongolian archery because these are one of the main factors that allow it to conquer so well. The other thing, too, is that with traveling with a horse does a lot of things on the steppe. It's your transportation. If you're very thirsty and dying of thirst, you can nick it for some blood to drink. If you're in a large company of Mongols, which they did travel in, one died, hey, you can feast on horse meat. So you wouldn't just travel with one horse. You would have 3 or 4 as remounts, and they would pasture there. So a horse does a lot of things. And one way that Mongolians were so effective is that they had a technique for shooting called the Mongolian release, or if you're right-handed, you keep the bow and you're left-handed. You push the bow forward as the right arm pulls the string back. So when it's fully extended, you're holding the string on the pad of your thumb and the finger curls around it for support. You couldn't hold 160 pounds comfortably, so Mongolian archers had a thumb ring to protect the thumb's pad from damage. And that's what made their compound recurve bow so strong. And they'd also have different bows for different purposes. You would have, you're going to love this, Steve. They actually sometimes carried incendiary arrows or burning arrows to.
Oh, nice.
Because every army in history always has those, right? They're always. We'll talk about that more in our next episode, but I have a couple thoughts on how to make this movie good, but how would you make this movie better?
I think to make it better, you'd really have to try and get a couple of Mongol actors in there. Like, I think it is culturally insensitive. Let's not mince words here in 2019 to have people in Fu Manchu mustaches. And I think you needed something like that to make that aspect a little bit more authentic. But I really do think adding bows in there, I think that would be the thing that in Mongolian combat, if you picture it in your mind, is thousands of arrows being fired by people, going full tilt on horses. That's what you want to see.
Yeah, exactly. I think just in terms of if they could have a military advisor to help with some of those things, instead of just a bunch of guys on horses running and slapping each other. Although in the Conqueror, horses are falling down constantly, and I guess you can train a horse for that. I remember in Blazing Saddles where Mongo punches a horse and it falls down. So I guess that's something you can do. I don't know if animal cruelty laws would preclude doing things like that in film, but they did it in spades back in the 1950s.
Yeah, they sure did.
So I had a couple ideas about how to make it better. This first one is just from a filmmaking standpoint, not from a historical. If you had an English cast instead of Americans, English actors are trained in Shakespeare, so they know how to bring emotion to really weird, not weird, but archaic language. So they could probably handle this weird script better than John Wayne could, although anyone could. But a movie I want to recommend that's awesome, I would say actually does Genghis right. And there was a 2007 movie called Mongol, The Rise of Genghis Khan. Have you ever heard of this film?
No.
Okay, yeah, this is an oddity. It didn't get much play in the United States, but the history of this movie is that in Kazakhstan, after Borat came out, Kazakhstan was tired of being internationally associated with Borat. I can't blame them. So the government started an industry called Kazakh Film to give millions of dollars to develop movies in Kazakhstan. And there's about $20 million that was spent to create this film about Genghis Khan. He's not Kazakh, but the Kazakhs sort of claimed him as a son of the Central Asian steppe. This movie is awesome. It is violent like 300. It was made shortly after that. And it's not completely historically accurate in a lot of things, but I would say it really sets the tone of the solitude on the steppe and the brutality. People are drinking horse milk all over the place. It shows Genghis's young betrothal, and then he's sent into exile, the conflict with his brother. It doesn't shy away from the brutality on the steppe, but it also shows how somebody would actually negotiate politics at that point. And if you take in a highly intelligent person, but you put him in the deep past, make him illiterate, what would that look like? So the quotation used at the beginning of the film, it's an actual Mongolian proverb that says, "Do not scorn a weak cub. He may become the brutal tiger." Just watch that movie. It is definitely, it's good as dumb fun. If you actually want to pay close attention to what's going on there, then it works as history as well. So yeah, I recommend that. And I found out when I was looking for The Conqueror that there was another movie called Genghis Khan, just called Genghis Khan, that came out in 1965 with Omar Sharif from Lawrence of Arabia in the starring role. So I guess that's a little bit closer to being accurate. He's Middle Eastern, still not Mongolian, but I guess that's closer geographically, so that's a little better, right?
Yeah, a little.
I mean, it can't get worse. So
no,
it's not possibly. So yeah, Steve, any other thoughts on The Conqueror?
No, I think, with this movie, you could certainly beat a dead horse with it.
Yes, horse buns. So
I think if that's a place to stop it.
Yeah. Oh, one other thing too. I will say that like telling the whole story of the Mongols, this could lend itself to a Netflix series with an enormous production budget. Start with Genghis's early rise, but then when you have sequels where they're conquering foreign lands, you could see Kievan Rus when they go to Russia, when they go to Khwarezmia, which is around Persia, when generations later they conquer the Abbasid Caliphate, when the Mongols go all the way to the plains of Hungary and they're fighting Teutonic Knights. I mean, the possibilities are endless. So, but yeah, Hollywood, if you're listening, call us up. But
yeah, well,
all right,
we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, exactly. We'll get producer credits. Well, we have beaten the figurative dead horse to death. I agree. So, yeah, thanks for listening. And in the next episode, we're going to see the historical train wreck, The Scarlet Letter, starring Demi Moore. See you then.